case line is that our representatives, they should be like us in order to fully be able to represent us. In this debate, I have two main arguments. Firstly, how incentives will change for the better if we impose this motion. And secondly, that our representatives, they should be like us for more reasons as well. So the median wage we define as a middle-class hourly wage. And this implies that the country should have a well-established middle class. So this country would probably be some sort of modern Western liberal democracy. Furthermore, politicians are people who are elected politicians who are usually high up in bureaucracy. These people usually enjoy quite good benefits and have a quite high wage. So our burden to prove in this debate is mainly that through this motion and through lowering their wage and putting a median wage, we will have better and more efficient policy making, and this is our main goal with this motion. Going into my main substantive, what is the incentive for policymakers to work and to carry out their policies? Currently, the policymakers or politicians, they enjoy a very high wage, very good positions, and quite a lot of benefits. So what types of incentives does this create for the politicians when they work? Firstly, it creates many incentives for these people to preserve their position and preserve the system. Because they already enjoy such a good position in the system, there is an incentive for the entire government to preserve the system so they can keep enjoying these benefits. So what does this lead to in the system? Firstly, this leads to a stagnation in the system because there will be a resistance to change. Because the people won't be willing to change, because that would mean that they would lose their great positions in government. This would secondly imply that there will be a stagnation in policy. This would mean that policy wouldn't be carried out forward. For example, this would also mean that politicians would age and maybe not be able to interact with society in the same way. And this would sort of create a disparity between what the public wants and what actually is needed. We can see this very clearly in, for example, US Congress, where they're extremely slow with imposing policies because they're simply not in contact with the society. They don't impose, for example, policies on new technological inventions because they don't really know about them because they're really, really old. Like, a lot of them are really old and they're not in touch with the new technological advancements and such things. We see that this is not the case for everyone. However, for a lot of people this is the case, and these incentives do exist and do encourage some people to do some bad behavior. So what we think is that politicians, they should serve the country. That should be the main goal for the politician. That should be the thing that they strive to do and the reason why they work. It shouldn't be for personal reasons, for like fame or for money or anything like that. It should be mainly serving. And we think we have a lot of people in countries that really want to serve. We think that we should create incentives for these people to step forward. So how do we make this happen? Firstly, we remove the incentives to preserve the system in the first place. So these people won't, there will be no reason for them to actually stay in those positions because they won't really gain anything from it. Instead, they would maybe move on to something else. There wouldn't be a reason for everyone to stay in government and try to preserve the position. Instead, you would have these people leaving the scene. This would leave room for new people to join in, and for these people to bring fresh ideas and fresh perspectives and actually connect with the actual society, what society actually wants.
If you like?
Sure.
You say middle class wage, the motion says median wage. It is illegitimate to exclude all developing democracies from the mechanism on the basis
But what I defined was a country with an established middle class, and therefore a country which probably has an established middle class, the median wage would probably be a median middle class wage. Sure, maybe if it's the lower part of the middle class or something like that, we don't really care about those technicalities in general. It's mainly that it's quite drastically reduced. If it's like reduced by 100,000, like 10,000 euros, or if it's reduced by 11,000 euros, that doesn't really matter. It's the principle of it being reduced quite drastically to a wage where you have to work quite hard. and you don't enjoy these benefits at the same time. So we think by lowering this wage, we also create other incentives for the politicians. Firstly, we create the incentive to actually have to work pretty hard. Because it won't be that you can work a little bit and then that can sustain yourself. If you have this quite fairly average wage, you have to work quite hard to sustain yourself, have a family, etc., and feed everyone. This would give incentives for politicians to actually work harder, work more, and actually serve the country even more than they did previously. We think that, firstly, having politicians who are deeply engaged with what they're doing and really want to serve their country, this will inherently mean that there will be better policy making, because these people will really strive to change society for the best, because they are the representatives that are representing the people, and the people want change. So they will be able to carry out this change better than previously. Secondly, if they actually work harder, they will be able to carry out these policies more effectively and in a better way, because there will be just more time spent on doing it. So we think for these two reasons, the incentives for policymakers will change for much better, and this will make so that the policies will in fact be better. Secondly, we think that the second argument about morality, we think that elected politicians, they are our voice. They should represent us, and therefore we think we alienate them if they have higher wage and they're upper class. There's disparity between who we are and who they are, and they're supposed to represent us. Thus, we think that changing their wage is quite it's proper to do, since they will be able to represent us better, since they will be able to relate to us better. They will be more like us, and therefore they will be able to understand the current things we have in society that we need to change, and so forth. They will be more connected with society, and this will be able to give them more informed decisions and make so that they can carry out even better policies. For all of these reasons, we proudly propose. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for that fine speech, and now across the floor and call upon the Leader of the Opposition to a proclamation.
So what we need to understand in this debate is why we, as individuals, as citizens, paying money or bringing a lot of benefits to politicians and bringing them a lot of tools to make their life easier, because we want that they will do their job better. This is the debate between us and between the first God. So I will have 2 points. The first point I will explain why we're giving them such tools. In my second point, I will explain how this is incentivize them to do better work for the people, for those citizens. So, few words, everybody. We have a lot of problem with their logic, because they assume that people go to be politicians and go to the parliament because they want more, they want easy life, they want more money, more hedonistic incentives. But we don't believe it. We say that most of politicians, or not most, a lot of politicians came from the public service before. We have a lot of ex-generals, we have a lot of people that came from the media, they were journalists, people that gave from their time to other people because they want to change the system, because they wanted to change what happened in their own state. We said that we have a lot of people that came from really specific cultures, or really specific communities that want to change the way that their community is being treated. So we say, if someone wants to be a politician, this is not just because he wants some money. But we say that they assume that they go only for those things. We say, yeah, maybe some of them goes for those things, but most of them goes because of the real important things to them. But we say that, and it will be in my point later, that if we wanted to do better job, we need to pay them as we pay for managers in the civilian system in the market. So this will be my first point. So this is one problem with their logic. The second problem that they told us that they actually assume that then if we will pay them the median wage, they will have the tools or they will work hard, and we ask why? Why they work hard? The reality says us that even in the market or even in a lot of other places, when politicians are not earning enough money, they're going into corruption. They actually writing their own laws to their own. No, thank you. We see this in a lot of places in the world, even in Western democratic places. We can see this. It was in Israel, for example. No, thank you. So, for my first point, we say why we actually bring them those tools, because we want. The only job, the only main job that they will do, it's the political job, the parliamentary job. Why? This is the example that this is the reason that because we gave them immunity, right? Because we want them to be free to legalize things, be free to write the rules, be free to be changed. We say that we're not believing and we're not buying this ideal world that, yeah, we will bring some real fresh people with a real fresh mantras and they will change it even with a medium wage. We say this is not ideal world. People incentivized by money. People, if someone will have the better opportunity to, even though they want to have, even if you will have the better opportunity in other place, he will go there because he wants to live his life as in the same symmetric as he evolved himself. He worked a lot of years, invested a lot of from his money to build his own ideal, and then they're saying, no, we're gonna pay you like this medium wage. We say this is not ideal work, so therefore we will lose a lot of good people with talented people, people that can change something. We say that even managers in the free market, they won't come to politicians even though they have a lot of good skills to change things as management. We have these ex-generals that have the skills to understand the political ideas, and they will go to other private places and they won't go to the political world, and therefore we're losing a lot of people. So we say, yeah, maybe and might be we'll accept that we have more people that insist with politicians. Maybe we will get more people with fresh blood, but we will lose a lot of good people that can change it, can understand the political map, that understands how things works. Second.
If the general is going into politics from the military, he's probably going to receive a lower wage than he actually did receive before. So why is the financial incentive not present when he's going into politics, and now there's supposed to be like a bigger financial incentive once he is in politics?
Thank you, sir. But the question is, how low we're gonna get his salary right now? Yeah, of course that in army he probably got some a lot of money, but it's not close to the medium salary. We're saying this is we're really below his own salary, his own conditions to bring some changes. We say in the reality, people incentivized by money, people incentivized by things that are not necessarily idealistic for us. They say, we want to change the system from beneath. We say, how? How are you going to change the system if the reality shows us other way? If the reality was, as you said, of course, a lot of people could actually go to politics and have some, and we could have another idealistic political system. So, for my second point, we say that they want better politicians. We want it as well. But we say, when we actually get it, we say, now, but we're actually bringing them a lot of incentivized to do better work. We're giving them a lot of tools. We bring them a lot of prestige to their job. We're actually saying them, not actively, but we're actually saying them, we gave you a lot. Now it's your turn to work. We bring them a lot of incentive. We can see in the free market, someone that we're giving them a lot of better conditions or better places to work and better atmosphere to work. We say people that feel that they have a place and a comfort place to work in, work better. Why? Because they don't ask themselves what I'm doing here, what I'm doing in this place that not recognize my own good abilities. We're saying we're bringing them the right atmosphere to actually do the job. So if you want they will be a better politician, this is how we get it, in our way. We say, yeah, we accept some of your case that we might lose some real fresh good politicians, but we say now we preserve better politicians, we preserve better people that understand the system, and as exactly as the free market works, we want people to be incentivized to do the better work. Thank you very much.
Thank that speaker for a fine speech. Now call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to further the case in favour of the motion. Here.
Before I go into my 2 points, my 2 substantive points, which have to do about how this will closer affect the politicians of their policies, which will lead to better decisions for the people, and how this will remove harmful politicians from the system, which are just in it for the money. I have 3 points of rebuttal in this situation. So he started off talking about how some politicians go in for the utilitarian sort of issue, that most politicians aren't in it for the money. And we acknowledge that most politicians aren't in it for the money in that sense, but some are still in it for the money, and in that sense that we're still removing the portion of the politicians that are in it for the money, and this portion is harmful to society, which I will go into later, and it is so harmful that this policy must be enacted. And even if all of them are not in it for the money, we still see a good thing coming out of this, even if all of the politicians are in it for the utilitarian cause and don't care about the pay. We see that this is another mechanism for the democratic system to function, because this allows the politicians to be more in touch with their voter base and more in touch with the democracy in general, because they're representing people. They're getting directly affected by their policies, and they're getting directly affected about what they do to the people. And we see the medium wage, their medium wage, as a good mechanism for them to feel their policies on an emotional level with the people and in the system of that. They also talked about how this will lead to corruption, but how this will lead to corruption and in that sense. But because these people are getting paid low, and therefore the people are incentivized by higher pay, won't go into public office. But we don't see this happening here, because we see that if we're paying these people lower wages, the people are already incentivized by money, and the people who see money as an important characteristic, as important to them, won't go into politics in the first place. Therefore, we will already exclude the people who are incentivized by money and prone to corruption in that sense. So we're fighting corruption in the sense that the people who are prone to go into public office, the people who are prone to go into Senate because they're incentivized by high wages in the Senate or incentivized by high wages in the Congress, will actually not be incentivized by that. Therefore, we're removing the elements, the personality traits that are incentivized by that sense. So we actually see this as a fighting corruption. No, thank you, sir. Yeah, so his third point had to do with that we want better politicians, because that higher wages, you get people who are like more educated, therefore they should get paid higher and stuff like that. But we have to ask ourselves here, what is a good politician? What is a good representation of the people? Who's going to represent their vote? Is it going to be in that sense? We see that the people who would be discouraged by a low wage would be discouraged by public office by a low wage are inherently bad politicians for the system. In that sense, we see the people who wouldn't go into public office because of the lower wages are people who aren't in it to serve the country, and who aren't in it to represent the people. We see that that personality, that sort of person who would be discouraged just because of the lower amount of pay to serve the people or representing the people in that sense, isn't going to affect the sort of effectiveness of his policy, but rather the effectiveness of his policy is how well he represents the people. His job is not as an academic, or his job is not to fulfill like X, Y, Z and how fast he does those things, but his job is an emotional one, and should be disconnected from a sense where there is a maximum sort of output. The job is inherently representing people, and you can't judge somebody by the sense that they're doing it well or they're doing it bad. So we see therefore that we don't see better politicians coming from this, and actually worse politicians coming from this. Yes, sir.
Does your motion apply to democracies with an established middle class, but which are developing nations, such as Ukraine or India?
As my first speaker said, we're talking about the medium wage in Western liberal democracies with a fair middle class, be it upper middle class or lower middle class by our standards. So onto my substantive arguments. How this will lead to better policy making for these people. So what we're talking about here is that we have another mechanism for politicians. Rather than just electing them to represent us, we also have the mechanism of them being directly affected by their policies. Therefore, we see how these politicians, when they take a decision that when they have a high wage or they live in a rich suburb, won't be as affected or won't be as invested in actually going through these reforms, because they won't actually feel the hurt, or they won't actually feel the effect of their policies. Like, this becomes a more personal element for them, and we see the medium wage as representing a sort of democratic, a holistic system in that sense, and therefore it's a good system of imposing another sort of check on these people, and another way of investing our politicians into the system, because they're more invested, and we have the people who are affected by this are the people, the medium wage people, which is a good representation of democracy as a whole, and we also see how the politicians become invested in this. And we think that this is what we're sort of aiming at, better politicians and better policies by these politicians. And onto my second argument, which has to do with removing the really harmful actors in the political system. So the people who are the monetary politicians, the people who are very interested in money, and who go into politics because they are interested in money. And it doesn't just have to do with them being, they will be so discouraged by earning such a low wage that we're sort of excluding them from the system. And this is crucial to a democracy, because we see these players very prone to corruption, very prone to private and corporate pressure, and even foreign pressure. In that sense, we're sort of removing this sort of mindset that the incentive for these people to go into politics, because these are people who can easily be manipulated by money, and this is extremely harmful for a government in the long term, to have these politicians who sort of want to uphold the status quo and want to uphold their wage and want to uphold the sort of system in place just because they want to keep their wage. In that sense, we don't want them to be motivated by the position because of the wage. We want them to be motivated by the position because they're serving the people. So in that sense, just as my first speaker said, it is critically important that the motivations of the politicians are in line with the best interest of the people. And for those reasons, we beg you to propose.
Thank that speaker for a fine speech, and now we welcome the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to finish the top half of the debate.
So, Mr. Speaker, we're going to talk to you about 2 points in this debate. I will talk to you, A, about how satisfaction, my self-satisfaction, is very important for my job, for how I've been doing my job and how I really like to do that and how I will contribute from myself to this job if I'm satisfied. The second point will be that in their logic, in opening a government, we will create a world that people that go to this to politics doesn't really put the best and the most effective people to gain our social causes that we fight for. But before that, a couple of points of rebuttal. Let's understand the main argument of opening a government. Eventually, they're saying we were afraid that people will not feel empathy to these rich people, these rich politicians doesn't really feel empathy to the people that they're serving. Therefore, the performance that they're doing and everything that they act doesn't really serve this public because doesn't really understand the pain of this public. Well, let's understand what this debate talks about. People, the politicians that we are elected, which means we as a society in the first place have the power to create somebody that came from lower places. By their logic, if we also take, even if we take a rich people as a representative, we have the power. So our power to change these kind of people that we choose. But why we need to increase or decrease their salaries? Let's understand. Now, my partner already explained to you that people that came to politics came from the military, came from the press, not specifically from rich families or rich countries. They're saying, now there is some contradiction in OG. From one hand, they're saying we stop corruption. People that also just want to do the best for the society will go to politicians. Well, for that, they're saying, A, also in the correct situation, in the status quo, they can go and we, as a society, the things that are better for us, can elect them. This is fault for this part. The second thing, the contradiction in this debate is they're saying, from one hand, the people go to there, go for the money, and because of the money is doing it, and this is their incentive, and we will decrease the incentive. But then he's saying to the rebuttal to my partner, well, they are already having money and they're losing money in the politics. Well, which one is it? They gaining money or they're losing money? We didn't really get it. We think that the money doesn't mean explaining why the money is the incentive or why it's deciding who is a good politician and not a bad politician. This is getting to my points. Well, I will try to explain by these 2 points why money is incentive for making a better world and why it's not mutually exclusive that somebody needs to be or just get money or to be good. So let's start. Self-satisfaction. When we pay to somebody money for his work, we're showing our recognition, our thankful for what he's doing. For example, if I'm learning in a college, I probably will get a low salary. Why? Because the society doesn't really recognize my contribution of who I am. When I finish my degree, I start to work, I start to gain more experience, my salary will higher. Why? Why it get higher? Because people recognize my abilities, recognize myself, and it's very important for me to go to the next stage. Why it's so important, and this is the link to this debate. They try to represent us in the previous speaker, who is the good politician. Well, we can't agree all of this, that a good politician has some basic characters. He must be ambitious, he must show empathy as he he must be a leader in some point or another. Which means if he needs to be ambitious, and we can agree about it because this is part of being a politician, he doesn't really go to this kind of work, he doesn't get the real salaries that represent who he is. Which means if I go to politician and I know that I doesn't get the salary that thing that represents me, why should I go there? Even though I want to do the best for society, there are a lot of things, but when I do something better, I want to get thank you. And this thank you came to be in the form of money. Not now, please. Another important thing, they doesn't really realize and analyze who these politicians are that being elected. These people are very criticized. They get criticized every day. They are in some point of their life, they became to be enabled because every act they're doing has been followed, has been criticized, and therefore we think this is the incentive. It's so important because think about it this way. This work is very stressful. This work is I've been followed. I've been criticized. I get enough money, so I will do it. But in the situation in their world, I will not get enough money. I'm ambitious. I'm good, which means character of a politician. I will go to another place, even though I won't contribute. I also individual. I also have a family. I also want to get satisfaction of what I'm doing and recognition, and I will not get it in this world. So yes.
Don't you think this person will get recognition from the press and the voter base? There are other incentives and other rewards in the democratic system.
By your logic, all the people can work in the world with very low salaries. It's not working in the real world. It doesn't represent it. But the main important thing is in the message, and from that I explain how satisfaction is important. The main argument was money is the problem because it shouldn't be the incentive. We will show you why it's not mutually exclusive. This is my second argument. We will create, in their logic, we will create a worse world of politicians. As I explained you, the money that I get, in some way represent who I am, what I'm contributing. As higher my salary, as higher my contribution, and this is how I feel with myself. It's not the money itself, but the money as a sign or something that symbolize who I am in the society. What's going to happen in the world of presenting? First of all, their world always falling apart in the status quo. Because also today, if I elect the person that will represent me, I can elect somebody with a middle class. I don't really have to take somebody from a higher class, which is already false. Because as long as I have the choice as a society to elect my representative, and it's not dictatorship, so this shouldn't be the problem of the salary. But if by their world, people that might go to there, that wouldn't be the most ambitious people, they wouldn't be the people that really can make the change. Because why? Because they agreed to the terms that doesn't really represent who they are. As long as they think that they are worth a middle salary, probably will be making a middle work. But if I go to this work in the status quo today, people that get higher salaries, they probably will be more motivated, as my partner already showed. They will be motivated. Why? Because they get recognition. A. They will be motivated. B. Because their family are satisfied. They have their own needs. They will not looking for other places. Which means money is the basic. It's not the amount to get all the money that I get. It's two effects: recognition, and the second thing is moral and the peace of mind that I have, that my family is okay. I don't need to look for a job. I get recognition and I get power, and we think it's more important. They don't show us how it falls in the status quo. Thank you very much for doing it.
I'd like to thank our speaker for a point speech, and now we begin the second half of the debate with the member of government.
May I begin?
Yep.
So what today we heard from today's opposition is basically that there are two main problems with the government's plan. Firstly, they said we are going to lose incentive to go into politics for successful people. And the second one, they were saying that basically politicians justify their very high wages, which of course we are going to oppose to. If we go to the first point, why it does not actually remove the incentive to go into politics. First thing I would like to call in here is the economic phenomenon called the reversed curve of wages, what basically means that at some point when a person's needs are satisfied, productivity does not increase even when you increase the wage drastically high. We believe that to achieve that point, a median income in a society where you have an established middle class is a good waypoint to that extent. So we believe that even though we increase the salary and with the politicians, we are not going to reach the productivity after they have their basic needs met and have enough money to live like a safe life. And we believe that the median income is a good telling of that. Secondly, I believe here when you come to income, even though if you buy into the idea that we have like countries when the median income does not represent like what a person should earn in order to live their life happily and so on, we believe in these cases we incentivize actually their work, because that means when their salary is actually is linked to how well the country is doing, they will have more incentive to do good policy, which are going to increase economic growth, because with a higher median wage for the people, their wage is also going to increase as well. And here we believe we have like another incentive, what's actually would happen in the countries when you do not have like the median wage on an acceptable level. The third point, they say the politicians are going to lose their social status, which we had before they were like generals and so on. First, we are not disturbed by the fact that politicians lose their social status. What we are saying here is that it's very wrong when you have a politician who comes in like as a representative of the working class, then to be elevated first into the portion of middle class and then basically appropriate into the part of the middle class as such. As such, we believe that when we come into motivation, like they're going to not have the privileges and the essence of the cream of society they are actually enjoying now. We're saying, yes, so what? We want that to happen because we want the politicians to represent the people they're supposed to represent, not just like one strata of the population. And this would be like a huge problem in modern democracy when we often complain politicians of left and right are basically just passing through reforms which are aimed to supporting businesses, which is basically the effect of that we basically elevate politicians to the point when they do not actually feel to connect with the people and with the well-being of the people. Yes.
Left-wing people are primarily rich, right-wing people are primarily poor. Why do you assume because someone is rich, they care less about the working class?
Firstly, I do not see the connection why left-wing people are supposed to be rich and right-wing people are supposed to be poor. I think there's like a contradiction, and I'm sorry, I really do not understand your comment. I believe that when a person is elected as a politician, they should like feel close to people in order to pass the reforms that are good for the people and not for a certain threat of the population. Now, if we go to our constructive points. Our points. Basically, what we are first questioning is how do you want our democracy to evolve in the future society? What we see today is a problem in democracy. We have like a very rigid party system which is not changing, which was the first government presented, and we want that system to change. We're going to analyze that problem further because in the core, why does not it actually change? It's the question of how the parliament works. Parliament works by establishing working committees in separate groups. Parliamentary members who work in those committees usually get additional monetary incentives. What happens is you have like old talks in the parliament who basically like sit on those committees where the actual work is done and not let young people go into those committees even though they were elected. And you have like one person who's like in 5 committees, takes salary from that committees, and he does not actually know nothing about the topics which it's about. If we change the salary to lower, we believe that people are actually going to work within committees where they believe they can actually make a constructive change. And we believe in this case, which actually help the people to progress forward and like to do the situation within the parliament that like people who actually know something are going to go in a certain area. The second point that I would like to hear in the modern democracy is of course the problem of charisma and what basically a politician is. Like, when we are saying they're saying, no, they are now going to become, they need their wage because they're in their criticism and so on and so on. What we believe here is simply not true. A politician can be anyone. It's not actually neither the education level, neither the prior work experience, neither to their age. We believe that actually most of the real hard work is done in the parliament, the groundwork in the parliament, no, thank you, is done not by politicians themselves, but by the legal groups and the bureaucracy that is like supporting the politics itself. Politicians make absolutely almost always decisions based on the political ideology, political decisions, while they do not actually write laws themselves. They have like legal groups standing behind them who write laws instead of them. And we believe that it's much more important that those groups are well paid in order to preserve their jobs and interested in doing that than politicians themselves who are supposed to be there in order to progress the political ideas, in order to progress society as such and help the society as such. And so in this case, we believe again this point of not losing the incentive like kind of fails, and we also believe that politicians do not actually, their existence does not justify such wages because they are not part of the upper class or something like that a priori in the first place. And so we believe this. We also would like to address this point here which they actually made, like your salary is supposed to reflect who you are. We believe that is bullshit without any analysis. We believe that your salary does not reflect who you are. We believe that people can be good people when they have low salary or high salary, and the same can go the other way. What we are saying here is that salary should be like same to the people so that we have like connectedness here and then we get more benefits than which we stay with salary as they are at the moment. The third point I would like to ask you, like how we want to evolve our democracy, is the fact that we have people who are candidating without any conviction. This is especially a problem in the countries when you have like new big parties supported by like big groups of people who do not have enough people to run for the parliament, enough ideologically available people within the party to run in the section, which basically then happens like what happened in Slovenia is they call their uncles, their aunts, their brothers and sisters, they basically, you're going to be a candidate here, you're going to be a candidate here, and you're going to be a candidate here. And they say, well yeah, it's a good salary, we're going to run for you. This creates a system afterwards, after such party is selected, which often they are because usually they have like a monetary backing. They have a parliament to be full of people without actually any interest in politics because they had the monetary incentive. Because like, yeah, okay, if we do this, it will be better for us than the status quo and we are like cleaners or like have a regular job. Now we are going to have like a better income. This creates basically a system where we export this idea of a one-party apparatchiks who basically just like convey the will of the party and not actually present the people themselves. And this we believe, in this kind of case, the change will lead into a better evolvement of democracy as such as to portray a more accurate representation of the will of the people as such. And that's why we believe that in this debate, it is the only reasonable decision to support to support today's proposition. Why? Because firstly, the incentive here really doesn't matter because the inverse wage curve, because we believe that politicians should be in there for their political ideology, not for money, because we want politicians to be incentivized by how well the country is doing. And we believe linking their income to that is quite a good way if the case about income stats. And thirdly, because we do not actually care what social status politicians are, because we are not all of the same social status, and we want them to represent the will of the people, not the will of the certain economic strata in society, because we do not believe the politicians justify their high wages because they're basically political workers, and we believe the main work in the parliament is done by the bureaucracy and the legal system, and that's why we believe that the only reason of supporting this debate is to support today's proposition. Thank you.
Thank the member of government for that fine speech, and now we call upon the member of the opposition. Here.
two things. Firstly, we are setting the debate in the global stage, so I think the CA team themselves have clarified that we can talk about the developing countries. And secondly, the other thing that I think we have all been talking about in here, we want to achieve the same thing, the better politicians, however, through different means. First argument is going to be about the fact that mostly rich people are going to become the politicians under this model. Why this is going to happen? Well, firstly, because the rich people already have enough money and they don't need to earn more money, and they have other sources of income to take out from when they are the politicians. So it's going to be easier for them to go into politics and also to fundraise money for their political campaigns, which is already happening under the status quo. Why this is going to be problematic? Because also less poor people are going to aspire to become the politicians. Why? Poor people who are smart and who are well educated, who get the scholarships to go to university and get out of that poverty, they also have a lot of problems to take care of. They have their own families who need some support. They don't have enough money to pay out their loans for the university. They don't have enough money for their children, because usually when people start politics, they are in their mid-30s or 40s when they already have the children and they need to sustain their family and to help them through life. However, when you decrease the wage of the politicians, what is going to happen is that they're going to seek for the alternative jobs, such as the ones in the private sector. Why this is problematic when this kind of thing happens? I would like to remind you that the first government has started their speech with saying that the politicians should be like us. This is not going to happen under your model, because the poorer people or the lower middle class people are not going to go to politics, because they're not going to have enough money to actually take care of their families in politics right now. What is going to happen is that rich people are going to take their places. The policy... Okay, and what this is going to result in is that the policies taken are going to be more likely in favor of the rich people because of the same background. If the rich people come into politics, they're more likely to be some businessmen or economists, and they're going to favor the policies of their own class. This is going to result in the decrease of the representation of the left-wing parties, and also of the parties that protect more the rights of the poor and also the benefits to the poor. This is also going to result in the lack of the competition of the ideas, such as, for instance, the opposing views, because the poorer would formerly favor the left, but now they wouldn't have that much parties to favor, because you won't have this strong leftist base once you actually decrease this, because the parties are going to actually favor more right-wing economical parties. This is also going to result in the economical policies that favor the rich and the poor not getting enough benefits, for instance, such as the poor currently are doing in the United States of America. This is also going to lead to the depoliticization of the society, because when the poor see that there is no real party that can effectively represent their interest, or that they are quite weak, this results in the fact that they just do not want to go and they do not want to vote on the elections, which is really problematic for the democratic states. Less minority representation is also going to occur, because in such countries as the United States, for instance, they don't have the well-established middle class of the black people, of the Latino people, who now would not go to politics because they wouldn't have enough money, and they would want to send their children to private schools. They would want to sustain good living for their families rather than be poor politicians. Yes, please.
How can you generalize these two groups as having to get that salary? Don't you think there are like 50 poor people who wouldn't care about, don't care about money enough, or 50 minorities who don't care about money that strongly that they won't go to office?
Right. I think that people generally care about money because they need to take care of their families and not only for themselves. What we are saying in here is that the politicians should have the competitive salaries to compete with the private sector, which is actually the second point. So less talented people are going to become politicians. Why this is going to happen? Because the political sector will lose in competition of merit with the private sector. Why this is going to happen? Because as a highly qualified, smart person, you would normally go to become rather a CEO of a company who earns millions of dollars rather than a politician. The only reason why the people actually become the politicians right now are just of a good will, if your policy would be taken, because they would think that, yes, I want to help my country, and this is actually why I am going to politics. However, as I have already explained, it's going to be really problematic if you're a person in your mid-30s with a loan for education and with children and with family and also with your parents who are getting old and who are not getting enough state funding as their pension, which you all need to help them, which would not occur in this model. So this is also insanely problematic for the developing countries, where this middle class is not that well established and where the problems of poverty are much higher than in the West. So what is this going to all result in, and why this is all important? It's because less talented people, when there are less talented people in politics, there is less competition in terms of ideas and in terms of the policies, which is going to lead towards governance. Why this is going to be the case? Because when you have an idea, you need a space for good debate. Even if there is one person opposing your idea, you still need to listen to that person, because through talking with that person, you might actually modify your policy and make it even better, which we are all striving for in our governance. So we think that under the policy where the politicians are going to get much less money and where the less talented people will be represented for the same reason, because they would all go to private sector, and because less poor people will be represented because the rich are going to take their places because they don't care about the money, this debate is not going to occur, because there is not going to be that different separation of the ideas. So we think that the bigger the pool of the people in politics, the more classes they represent, the more ideas they represent, the better it is for the governance, because the citizens themselves must choose which policies they're going to favor or which parties they're going to vote for on the next elections.
I'd like to thank the member of opposition for that fine speech, and now welcome the government leaders to make the case for their side. There.
Firstly, I want to talk about two main things. Firstly, I will analyze initiatives that actually make people go into politics. And secondly, I want to talk about who is running and the impact that we have on actual democracy and manifestation of a democracy. But firstly, I would actually like to address some of the concerns that today's opposition has. When they are talking about, well, if we introduce this minimum wage into politics, then we will automatically eliminate all the leftist parties and leftist politicians, because we will simply eradicate them, because only the rightists are rich and they will be the only ones going into politics. Well, we obviously do not agree with this, and we think that this is just some idea that opposition has without actual merit behind it. Because let's see what the leftist parties are usually fighting for. Mostly for human rights, for labor rights, and they are often associated with labor unions, with syndicates, and similar things. So what we're actually seeing is that leftist parties are usually the ones that are that have the best interests of labor unions and of the working force in mind, which means that they are actually representing the most important things that the parliament is actually fighting for, because they are representing a working force, and working force is actually essential part of the general population. So obviously there is absolutely no reason why we would eliminate leftist parties with this medium wage. Secondly, when the opposition is saying, well, only rich people will become politicians, that's obviously not true. If that were true, then we would have absolutely no charities, because also very highly qualified people are part of the charities, are leading charities, and they are doing it out of their own good heart because they want to change the world. And if the opposition thinks that the only way that you are actually motivated to do something good in the world is with money, then obviously all hundreds of thousands of charities around the world do not exist in their world. Point? Yeah.
we don't say there won't be any poor politicians, but we say they are much less likely than the number of poor politicians are now.
Thank you. No, this is definitely not true. They are acting as if the median wage of the middle class is something that people cannot live on. No, middle wage of the middle class is completely sufficient to feed your family without having any concern about the survival of your family. And this is not only true in the most developed countries, but it's mostly true around the world. And plus, the research from one of the Ivy League schools, I forgot which one, actually shows that the incentive of working decreases after American worker reaches the 70,000 US dollars per year. Which means that that's not that high of a threshold, and yet their productivity and interest for working decreases because of the reverse wage curve that my teammate was talking about. And now let's go on to my 2 points. First one about incentives, when I want to compare these money incentives versus the service incentive. The thing is that money is not really the best motivator. Various research articles also show that people are more likely to be motivated by satisfaction they get from their work, by the impact they are doing, by the respect they get from the society. And we're saying that the money, according to the research, is one of the least important parts when it comes to job success of a person. And consequently, we're also saying that by being elected, but by hundreds of thousands of people, you actually get recognition and you get this impact that you're looking for, more so than in any other job, because so many people actually voted for you and what you stand for. Additionally, we were also saying that with elimination of very high wages in the politics, we are eliminating incentives for people who only go there because of the money incentives, and we are actually bringing people who want recognition for their actual work. Second thing, second thing is that, as my teammate also stated, a lot of countries actually work through working committees of the parliament, and by having this high monetary incentive for being in various committees, you're actually eliminating capable and skilled people from doing their job, and you only get unskilled politicians who are there for their monetary gain. And we're saying that by introducing this median wage, we're eliminating these career politicians who only go into politics because of the money and who change their opinions probably more often than their underwear before every election cycle, when the only thing important to them is actually getting elected without having much impact. By eliminating this monetary incentive of going into politics, we actually get politicians who stand firm on their ground and who are actually fighting for their incentives and for the project that they believe in, which means that we actually get more lasting impact and we get policies that are important for ordinary people. Then thirdly, what we get when we have this service and recognition incentive rather than monetary recognition is also people who, firstly, because of the wage that represents median wage of the society, know what average people feel like and how do they live. And secondly, we also get people who are very connected with average Joe of their country, which means that firstly they understand their position, and secondly we do not have this wide gap between elite group of people who are in the politics and these rich people, and the disconnect between the values and between their living standards. And secondly, we also eliminate this group of elite politicians who are only fighting for their own incentive, because they, as a medium, as a representatives of middle class, have the highest motivation to actually improve conditions in the country, which means that they are not taking care only of their own interests, which would occur if they were just an elitist bunch of people, but they are actually trying to get entire country to a higher level of living standard, because that is in the best interest of the people they are representing, and most importantly, it is also in the best interest of them and their families. Thus, with improving the conditions in the country, they are also improving their own conditions. And this is why you should vote for the second proposition. Thank you.
Thank the speaker. That fine speech, and now welcome the opposition to finish off the debate.
First, I'm going to discuss whether or not money is a bad incentive, or even incentive at all for politicians. Secondly, I'm going to talk about our extension, namely why it's policy to a narrower, richer, less talented pool of politicians, and why that is intensely problematic and leads to worse governance. And why the impact of less talented politicians is far greater than the impact of slightly less connected politicians as property. One piece of unrelated rebuttal first. Closing governments say linking politicians' income to the median wage is good because it gives them an incentive to improve the life of the average person. This is true, but doesn't entail giving politicians themselves a median wage. We can give politicians, as we do now, 3 times the median wage of the country, and still link their wage to what the median wage is, or average GDP growth, or something like that. So this isn't specific to this policy, and hence is irrelevant. Okay, so why isn't money a bad incentive? Okay, so government's case broadly goes like this. People motivated purely by money make bad politicians. So if we reduce the wage to a median wage, we get rid of these people. Why is this false? Reason 1, these people don't exist. Note, as we've consistently pointed out, and as Anna points out in her speech, that even in the status quo, the private sector pays drastically higher wages than politicians get. What does that mean? It means that the people with the skills, with the talent, with the interpersonal connection, the ability to be persuasive and to persuade the people to win often intensely competitive elections for high office in democratic countries, are the same people who have the skills to get very good jobs in the private sector. This means that anyone who chooses to be a politician already obviously doesn't do it for the money, because if there was money involved, they wouldn't be being a politician, they'd do something else where they get a far higher wage for far less work. So I don't accept the premise of their entire case, which is there exists a significant portion of politicians who are in it just for the money. I don't accept this is true, and this takes up most of their case. Even if it is true, why is it not a problem? Okay. Being disconnected or not caring about someone on an individual level doesn't matter that there are other reasons for you to care. For example, I don't care about persuading you as a person about this motion. I only care about it in the context of this term, because that's an incentive in terms of speaks. Likewise, even if politicians don't individually feel connected to the working Joe and care for that reason, because they're money-grubbing monsters, they have a strong incentive to help the average person and create policies which improve their lives, because that's how they get them connected. So even if it is true that politicians are largely disconnected from the average person in terms of what they actually care about, the system gives them an incentive to act as they are connected. Which means their point, even if true, is irrelevant, because politics are the same either way, because elections are a powerful competitive force, giving them a different incentive aside from duty. No thank you. Okay. So this is the majority of the government case gone, right? Because this case was largely based on the 2 assumptions: politicians are in it for the money, even though they themselves accepted that politics isn't very profitable even now, and that politicians are, for some reason, not incentivized by elections to already do the best they can for the people. Moving on. So why will there be a narrower pool of politicians, and why is this intensely problematic? First, let's deal with this. Proposition throughout their case say it doesn't matter if you have less politicians, because politicians are essentially interchangeable. All they do is represent people. They don't make decisions as bureaucrats. It doesn't really matter how skilled, how talented they are. None of it matters. There are a number of reasons to believe this is entirely false. Reason number 1. Politicians do make decisions. So if you're a senator, you make decisions about which policies and which acts to vote for or against. If you're a president, you make decisions about which acts to sign into motion or not. It is true you have advice from your bureaucracy, but you often have conflicting advice. For example, when the financial crisis came about, the US Fed gave advice to the president from different factions, both to stimulate the economy and to cut back spending. For example, sometimes bureaucracies can be wrong, and for example, the US military thought an occupation of Iraq would go fine, it went horrifically badly. As a politician, you need the skill, the talent, and the ability to weigh up often very complex and difficult decisions to do so well. Also, you need to reform the bureaucracy. Note, politicians are here to pass a new policy, bureaucracies don't propose policy, they only go on selected paths of research. If you as a politician are not talented, if you're not capable, if you're not able, then you can't reform the bureaucracy, you can't propose these new policies, you can't change embedded structures to make whole the society back. So there's every reason to believe that better politicians are a thing, and a politician's skills and talents do matter. Why is this relevant? This is relevant because if we in government opposition have shown that there will be a smaller pool of politicians as a result of this policy, that is a massive harm. Because it means less policy proposed for people to treat. It means less decision makers coming about, because there are less politicians for voters to make their elections on. It means people generally being less capable in office leading to very bad decisions. Now, prima facie, compare this harm, which is very real, it seems to be, very likely to happen, and is a very significant harm, because bad decisions in office can lead to massively negative consequences. So what's the only harm they're given, which is money makes you somewhat detached from ordinary people, even though you have a number of other reasons to care about what ordinary people do, namely they're the ones who elect you. It seems that if we can prove this harm even to some extent, we by default win this debate over government. Before I go on, I'll take open government.
But of the 320 million Americans, we think there are quite a few talented people. But the problem is that we have this stagnated system which doesn't allow them to go there. We think we have enough talent, but the system doesn't allow them to do it.
Okay, one, change the system have term limits of, say, 8 years. Two, I don't buy this is the case. Politicians are kicked out all the time. They stay, it's because they can win elections, fine. I don't want to kick out old politicians, people have elected, simply to put in new ones who may be worse in their place. Okay, so why the narrow pool of politicians? And note here, I've also already justified both first halves and our exception. So firstly, what has Anna told you? Politicians will be richer. No, if we can prove this, if you don't accept anything else said in my speech, we win this debate by default, because all their benefits are premised on politicians being poor. So why will politicians be richer? Their logic goes as follows. If we pay politicians less, they'll be richer. This would be true if it wasn't the case that politicians can switch profession, right? So what we told you is very simple. We've said when you pay people a middle-class wage, for someone who's very rich or quite wealthy, for Bill Clinton, his wage doesn't matter to him, right? If you're wealthy, which means you're rich, your wage doesn't really matter that much to you because you have money anyway to do what you want. What we have also said is that for people who are poor, for people who are working class, the people who these guys want to represent the country because they think they're no suitable politicians, these people are most likely to be deterred by this wage. Why is it the case? Note, even if it's a middle-class wage, gives you a comfortable life, you're deterred not because you think you'll be out in the street and become a politician, because you have to accept a dramatic cut to your quality of living. So the situation you find yourself in as a working class person going to be a politician is you're probably already reasonably successful, otherwise you wouldn't have the ability to become a politician. You're probably doing reasonably well in the private sector. You probably have a substantially higher than middle class income. But the thing is, when you become a politician, you would have to accept a substantial cut to your income. Which means your family, your children will have to subsist on a lower income, going to worse schools and going for Hajj. We don't think most working class people will accept it. We think that leads to hence less working class politicians, and in itself defeats their entire case. Thank you.